So your English teacher asked me to come into your classroom today because I'm going to show you how to use some digital resources to help you research and find out how The Great Gatsby was both written in the 1920s and about the 1920s. So what we're going to be thinking about today is how primary sources help us understand the influence a time period has on a novel's characterization and setting. And I've got a short clip for you, and I'd like you to think about keywords from the clip and how it relates to Gatsby that you've been reading, and the mood and the atmosphere of the film. Now, this film is a student-produced film, and what you guys are going to be doing in about 5 weeks is sharing your own student-produced films. So this is a little taste of what we want you to be doing after you finish The Great Gatsby. How do I turn up the...
There should be a knob up there, the panel.
Here. Thank you.
Morals were looser, the liquor was cheaper.
The Roaring Twenties is also referred to as the Jazz Age. Referring to this time, Fitzgerald once said, "It was an age of miracles, it was an age of art, it was an age of excess, and it was an age of satire."
In The Great Gatsby, music and clothing illustrate the Roaring Twenties. In the 1920s, fashion entered a more modern era. In this time, the women began to dress for comfort. The women's rights movement played a large role in this change. Women discarded corsets and took on a more boyish figure.
Men also took on a more comfortable style. They stopped dressing entirely formal on a daily basis and took on a more athletic look, but they continued to put their best looks forward at social events. The fashion of the Roaring Twenties is represented in Gatsby throughout the entire novel. The parties at Gatsby's mansion and Tom's apartment really show off the style of the time.
I like your dress. I think.
Okay, so what did you notice? What were some of the things they were talking about in that film that have to do with the 1920s?
Excess.
Excess, yes. What else were they talking about?
Jazz?
Yes, more specifically, what did they call it?
The Jazz Age?
Yes. Anything else?
Parties.
Parties. What do you think they had at those parties? What do you know from
I have no
Gatsby?
idea.
What do you know from your reading? Liquor, yes. Anything else? What about fashion? Yes. And they talked about women having independence, right? They talked about men having independence and women having independence. So, what I want you to do is think about these words here, and these are going to be keywords that you're going to use to search the database later to find out about the 1920s. And on your desk, you have a handout, and it's called Roaring: Who, What, Why, Where, When, and How. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to read over the handout that is with there. And it's from the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum. And it's a series of short paragraphs about the 1920s. And I want you to notice particularly, so if you're having difficulty recalling keywords or maybe the movie was too short, you can pick them out of here. And this will help tell you what the 1920s were all about. So I want you to think about keywords you highlighted in the article and put them on your sheet. And then from your reading of Gatsby, or maybe the words we just talked about, I want you to come up with some keywords as well. And then I want you to think how you're going to search for this information. And how would you identify accurate sources for this information? So I'm gonna give the students about 5 minutes to work on that. And I've noted in my lesson plan that they can talk amongst themselves. They don't have to read the whole thing, they can just read some of it. And it's basically so they've had a video, they have something to read, they have their own recall, and they have something concrete to go into searching with.
It's adorable. It's just
Okay. So on our agenda today, we are going to talk about some vocabulary words. We're going to review the Big Six research process, which you'll use throughout the next month or so to make your video. We're going to talk about how we authenticate sources, and we're going to do some database searching. So the Big Six research process, this is just to give you a big picture of, even though you're reading Great Gatsby in your English course, and it's a work of fiction, we're going to research the non-fiction elements that Fitzgerald weaves into his novel. And we're researching that throughout a process, right? We're defining our task. So what is our task? Our task is to research the 1920s. We're also going to use some information-seeking strategies. So we're going to talk about that today. What are the best sources we can use? Then we're going to locate those information sources. And then we're going to pull the information from them, and we're going to make a movie, right? And then we're going to share that movie with our classmates and our teacher, and maybe put it up on the school library's website, and anybody else who wants to see it. So when we're thinking about source types, I want you to think of 3 different source types. We have primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources. I'm pretty sure you've probably heard of primary sources and secondary sources. Are those terms unfamiliar to anybody? Okay, good. So, what you read at the beginning of class, do you think that that was a primary source or a secondary source? Just thinking about what you know about them. Anybody have any guesses? It's from a museum, right? And it talks about the exhibits in a museum. Anybody have any guesses? Jenny?
Secondary,
It is a secondary source. How do you know that?
because it's not an original document of any sort.
It's not an original document from the 1920s, right? But it's about original documents from the 1920s, yeah? It's about these exhibits within the museum. So what makes it a secondary source? How did they write this? What do you think they had to do to write this? Do you think they had to go to the museum? Christina?
They probably had to go there and look at primary sources.
They did, yeah. They had to go there and look at the actual documents, photographs, voice recordings, music recordings from that time. So we're going to look at a couple of examples here. We have a primary source here that is a political cartoon. Now, it might be kind of hard to see, but at the top it says manslaughter, ? And then it has pure whiskey in a box here, and it has the jury here, and on this guy's hat it says bootlegger, right? So in just looking at this information up here, do I know if this is a primary source yet, if I'm just looking at the cartoon? No, because I don't know when it was created, right? But it just so happens I got this from the National Archives website, and underneath it, it gives me information. Now it says that this item was produced or created in 1922. So that means that it is a primary source because it was actually created in the era that I am studying. So next, we've got the example that you already went through, and that is a secondary source, right? So somebody looked at primary sources, and they analyzed, and they summarized, and they're telling us about those primary sources. Are secondary sources still good to use when we're doing research? Yeah, absolutely, right? Especially if you want some more information about it before you go look at a primary source. So they're definitely good. You just have to cite who has written the primary source or who has written the secondary source, and make sure that your synthesis of the information comes with information behind it. Then we've got a tertiary source. And a tertiary source is a big giant resource that pulls together both secondary and primary sources. So today, we're going to look at U.S. history and context, which is one of our Gale databases on our library website. But a tertiary source could also be your textbook or any of the other databases or websites that are out there. Some tertiary sources you have to pay for, some of them you do not. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is I have 4 stations set up, and each of them have a different primary source on them. They're a mixture of advertisements, political cartoons, and short newspaper articles. And you guys are going to take your handout here, the 6 C's of primary sources, and you're going to fill in the main idea of that primary source. You're going to tell me if there is an author of that primary source. So how do you know that it is from the 1920s? I want you to tell me about the context. So from that document alone, what do you think is going on in the rest of the world? Connections. So can you make any connections to the Great Gatsby? Can you make any connections to your life? Communication. Who wrote this primary source, or who took the photograph? Is there a bias, or what's the point of view from? And then the conclusion. So how does the primary source contribute to our understanding of history? So in this case, you might want to relate it back to Gatsby, or you might just want to talk about the 1920s in general. This is just to familiarize you with primary sources. I want you to try to do 2 of them. We're only going to get 10 minutes, but I want you to try. So you guys don't have the examples, but I provided Lisa with the examples, and I chose a mixture of pictures and newspaper articles just in case students are at different levels. Maybe they don't read as quickly, maybe they're more comfortable with an advertisement, but just so it's really self-directed. So, all right, we're going to come back here, and we are going to talk a little bit about the Gale Database Key. So I hope you all looked at some of those primary sources and evaluated them for relation to the Great Gatsby. And when I pull up the Gale database, you're going to see these 3 different symbols. The green circle means that it's basic. So if you're having difficulty understanding, I would pick the green circles because they're going to be easy to read and it might be a good introduction to what we're talking about. The yellow square is the intermediate one. So those get a little bit harder to read, but I think that you can still try them. And then the advanced are the red triangles. And again, I would try them if I were you, but if it's too difficult, that's okay. The other thing that's cool about the Gale database is they offer citation tools, which we're going to talk about next class. So when you find a resource and click on it, if you click on the citation tools, it helps you build your bibliography, which we're going to want as part of your video. It also has a translate function. So say English isn't your first language, you can translate that entire document that you found into a different language, which might help you read it and understand it better. Or if you're tired of reading and tired of me talking, you can also listen to it. So that will help you as well. So the last thing we're going to do today is you are going to search this database by yourself, And you're going to fill in this sheet. At the end of class, I'm going to collect this, and this is going to be a small quiz for you. I've put an example at the top. So say you were searching for a character or alcohol, you can put whatever you want in here, one of your keywords. I'm going to try flappers. And then you can pick from one of the primary sources, or you could read some secondary sources if you want to. But my focus today is going to be on primary sources. So if I click on this one, because it's green and it's easy for me to read, I just want you to read this, look at the picture, and then I'm going to write down where it's from, what it's about, and the URL. Then I'm going to talk about how it relates to the Great Gatsby. And lastly, I'm going to say how I knew this source was a primary document. So in the Gale databases, it's pretty easy. It tells you it's a primary document. But what other clues are in here that could help you see that it's a primary document? So they're going to have about 10 minutes to do that. And then I'm going to collect the quizzes and going to wrap up by saying, next class, we're going to continue exploring the databases, and you guys are going to do some questions on your own. You're going to find lots of sources. And I've also given you an additional handout that has other databases and websites listed on it that you can use next class. And it's all going to go towards this awesome video that you were making at the end. Your time is up. Thank you.